What happens when Hollywood's most beloved pirate meets late-night television's biggest ego? In just 34 seconds, one cruel comment would destroy years of friendship and send shockwaves through the entertainment industry. This is the untold story of the night Johnny Depp was kicked off Jimmy Kimmel's show after the most explosive argument in talk show history. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think really happened that night. Now, let's get into it. The green room at the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Johnny Depp sat quietly in the corner, his signature rings catching the fluorescent light as he nervously adjusted his vintage jacket. He had done this dance hundreds of times before, but tonight felt different. The weight of recent legal battles had taken their toll, and his once confident demeanor seemed more fragile than usual. "Johnny, 5 minutes until we're live," called out a production assistant, clipboard in hand. Johnny nodded, taking a deep breath as he made his way toward the stage. The familiar sound of the audience warming up echoed through the corridors. But instead of excitement, it filled him with an unexpected sense of dread. Jimmy Kimmel was already at his desk, shuffling through his note cards with that trademark smirk that had made him millions. He barely acknowledged Johnny as he took his place in the guest chair, the same chair where countless celebrities had shared their most intimate stories and promoted their latest projects. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Johnny Depp," Jimmy announced with theatrical enthusiasm as the cameras rolled. The audience erupted in applause, their genuine affection for the actor filling the studio. Johnny waved, managing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Johnny, great to have you back on the show," Jimmy said, his tone already carrying a hint of something that felt less than welcoming. "It's been 3 years since you were last here?" "Something like that, yeah," Johnny replied, settling into his chair. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Always a pleasure." "Well, I have to ask," Jimmy continued, leaning forward with that predatory gleam in his eyes that regular viewers had come to recognize. "How are you holding up with everything that's been going on? I mean, the headlines have been pretty intense lately." Johnny shifted uncomfortably. "You know, Jimmy, I'd rather focus on the positive tonight. I've got some exciting projects coming up that I'd love to talk about." "Oh, come on, Johnny," Jimmy pressed, his smile growing wider and more sinister. "The audience wants to know. They've been reading about your personal life for months. Surely you can give us something." The audience began to sense the tension building. What had started as a typical late-night interview was quickly turning into something much more uncomfortable. Johnny's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I think my work speaks for itself," Johnny said diplomatically. "I'm here tonight because I have a new film coming out, and I'd love to share that with your viewers." Jimmy chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Right, the new film. But honestly, Johnny, don't you think people are more interested in the real drama? I mean, your personal life has been more entertaining than anything Hollywood could write." The studio fell silent. Even the cameramen exchanged glances, sensing that their host was crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. Johnny's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his chair. "Jimmy," Johnny said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that only those who knew him well would recognize. "I came here as a friend. I've been on this show many times, and we've always had great conversations about my work. Can we please keep it professional?" "Professional?" Jimmy laughed, and this time it was loud enough for the entire audience to hear the mockery in his voice. "Johnny, when you make your personal life as public as you have, everything becomes fair game. That's how this business works." Johnny's eyes flashed with anger. "My personal life became public because people like you made it public. I never asked for any of that scrutiny." "Oh, please," Jimmy scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically for the cameras. "You're an actor, Johnny. You chose this life. You can't cherry-pick which parts of fame you want to deal with." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Members of the audience began shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Some were already pulling out their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. "You know what, Jimmy?" Johnny said, his voice rising slightly but still maintaining control. "You're right. I did choose this life, but I also chose to consider you a friend. I've been coming on this show for over a decade, supporting you, helping your ratings, being nothing but respectful and professional." Jimmy's smirk faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "And I appreciate that, Johnny. I really do. But friendship doesn't mean I have to softball you questions when the whole world is watching." "Softball questions?" Johnny repeated, his voice incredulous. "Jimmy, you just called my personal struggles entertainment. You just told a room full of people that my pain is somehow amusing to you." The audience was completely silent now. Even Jimmy's usually reliable laugh track seemed to have abandoned him. The weight of Johnny's words hung in the air like smoke, And for the first time since the interview began, Jimmy appeared to realize he might have pushed too far. "Johnny, I didn't mean it like that," Jimmy said, but his tone suggested he wasn't particularly sorry. "Look, we're all adults here. This is late-night television. People expect a little edge, a little controversy." Johnny stared at him for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. "You want controversy, Jimmy? Here's some controversy for you. You've been my friend for over 10 years. You've been to my house. You've met my family. You know what I've been going through. And instead of showing even an ounce of compassion or respect, you decided to use my lowest moments for your entertainment." The cameras continued rolling, capturing every uncomfortable second. Jimmy's producers were frantically gesturing from the sidelines, but their host seemed oblivious to their signals. "Johnny, you're being a little dramatic, don't you think?" Jimmy said, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made several audience members actually gasp. "I mean, you're an actor. Drama is literally your job." And there it was, the moment that would define everything that came next. Johnny's face went completely still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, the kind that makes smart people start looking for exits. The audience could feel it too, that electric tension that happens right before lightning strikes. "Drama is my job?" Johnny repeated slowly, each word measured and deliberate. "Jimmy, let me tell you what my job really is. My job is to bring characters to life, to tell stories that matter, to create something beautiful out of nothing. Your job, apparently, is to tear people down for applause." Jimmy's smirk was starting to look forced now, but he pressed on like a man who didn't know when to stop digging. "Oh, come on, Johnny. You can't tell me you didn't expect this. You agreed to come on the show. You knew what you were walking into." "I knew I was walking into what I thought was a friendly conversation with someone I trusted." Johnny shot back, his voice rising for the first time since he'd sat down. "What I didn't know was that I was walking into an ambush, orchestrated by someone who apparently gets his kicks from kicking people when they're down." The studio audience was completely silent now. Some people were covering their mouths in shock. Others were recording everything on their phones, knowing they were witnessing television history in the making. The cameramen kept rolling, even though several producers were making frantic cutting motions from behind the cameras. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, trying to project casual confidence, but sweat was starting to form on his forehead under the hot studio lights. "Johnny, you're taking this way too personally. This is just television." "Just television?" Johnny's voice cracked slightly, and for a moment the pain he'd been hiding broke through. "Jimmy, do you have any idea what the last 2 years of my life have been like? Do you have any clue what it feels like to have every detail of your personal struggles dissected by strangers? And now you, someone I considered a friend, want to pile on for ratings?" "Look, Johnny," Jimmy said, his tone becoming even more dismissive, "I get that you're going through some stuff, but you can't expect the world to stop turning just because you're having problems. Life goes on, the show goes on." That was it, the final straw. Johnny stood up so quickly that his chair nearly toppled backward. The sudden movement sent a ripple of gasps through the audience, and several security guards near the stage took a step forward. "You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right. Life does go on. And you know what else? I don't have to sit here and take this from someone who clearly has zero respect for me as a person." Jimmy's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't going according to script, and for the first time since the interview began, he seemed to realize that he might have seriously miscalculated. "Johnny, sit down. Let's talk about this like adults." "Like adults?" Johnny laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jimmy, an adult would have shown some basic human decency. An adult would have maybe, just maybe, shown a little compassion for someone who's been through hell and back. But instead, you chose to be a vulture." The audience was completely transfixed. This wasn't the usual late-night television banter they were used to. This was raw, real, and absolutely riveting. Some people were actually on the edge of their seats, literally. Jimmy tried to regain control of the situation. "Johnny, please, you're making a scene. Think about your career, your reputation." "My reputation?" Johnny's voice rose to a level that made the microphones crackle. "You want to talk about reputation, Jimmy? Let's talk about yours. You built your career on being the funny, relatable guy, right? The guy who makes people laugh without being mean. But what you're doing right now? This isn't comedy. This is cruelty." Jimmy's face was starting to flush red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. "Johnny, I think you need to calm down and remember where you are." "I know exactly where I am," Johnny said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more weight than his shouting. I'm sitting across from someone who used to be my friend, someone who I trusted, someone who has decided that my pain is worth sacrificing for a few cheap laughs and higher ratings. The studio was so quiet, you could have heard a pin drop. Even the usually chattering audience members were holding their breath. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what was quickly becoming the most explosive moment in late-night television history. Jimmy made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Johnny, look, maybe I came on a little strong, but this is just how these interviews work. People want honesty. They want real talk." "Real talk?" Johnny stepped closer to Jimmy's desk, and the host instinctively leaned back. "You want real talk, Jimmy? Here's some real talk for you. What you're doing right now isn't journalism. It isn't entertainment. It's exploitation. You're taking someone at their lowest point and using it as content." "That's not what I'm doing," Jimmy protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "That's exactly what you're doing," Johnny continued, his voice building momentum like a freight train. "And the worst part is, you know it. You know exactly what you're doing, and you're doing it anyway because you think it makes good television." Jimmy stood up now too, apparently deciding that he needed to match Johnny's energy. "You know what, Johnny? Maybe you're right. Maybe this is exactly what I'm doing. But you want to know something? It is good television. Look around you. Everyone's watching. Everyone's engaged. This is what people want to see." The audience actually gasped at this admission. Several people shook their heads in disgust. Jimmy had just confirmed everything Johnny had accused him of, and he'd done it with pride. Johnny stared at him for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with a sadness that was somehow more devastating than his anger had been. "You know what, Jimmy? You just proved my point better than I ever could." The silence that followed Johnny's words was deafening. It stretched on for what felt like an eternity, thick and heavy like fog rolling in from the ocean. Jimmy's face had gone from red to pale in the span of seconds, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had just admitted on live television. "Johnny, Jimmy started, but his voice cracked. For the first time in his career, the man who made his living with words found himself completely speechless. "No, Jimmy," Johnny said, holding up his hand. "You've said enough. Actually, you've said too much. You just told a room full of people, and everyone watching at home, that exploiting someone's personal pain is good television. You said that with your chest, with pride." The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats now. What had started as entertainment had become something much darker, something that made them feel complicit just by watching. Several people were actually getting up to leave, unable to stomach what they were witnessing. Jimmy tried to recover, his media training kicking in like muscle memory. "Johnny, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. What I meant was that authentic conversations, real moments, that's what connects with people." "Authentic?" Johnny laughed bitterly. "Jimmy, there's nothing authentic about ambushing someone who trusted you. There's nothing real about using friendship as bait for a trap. You invited me here under false pretenses, and now you're trying to spin it like some kind of noble pursuit of truth." The cameras were still rolling, capturing every nuance of what would undoubtedly become the most replayed clip in late-night television history. The producers had given up trying to signal for commercial breaks. They knew they were witnessing something that couldn't be stopped, something that had taken on a life of its own. "Johnny, please," Jimmy said, and for the first time, there was genuine desperation in his voice. "Can we just take a step back here? Maybe we can start over." "Start over?" Johnny's voice rose again, his composure finally beginning to crack completely. "Jimmy, you can't unsay what you just said. You can't undo what you just did. You just showed everyone who you really are when the cameras are rolling, and you think you can get away with it." Jimmy's hands were visibly shaking now as he gripped his note cards. "Johnny, I've been doing this show for 20 years. I've interviewed thousands of people. This isn't personal." "That's exactly the problem," Johnny exploded, his voice echoing through the studio. "It should be personal. When someone you call a friend is struggling, when they're going through the worst time of their life, it should matter to you. But it doesn't, does it? Nothing matters to you except the show." The audience was completely transfixed. Many had their hands over their mouths in shock. Others were wiping away tears, moved by the raw emotion in Johnny's voice. This wasn't the suave, charming actor they were used to seeing. This was a human being in pain, fighting back against someone who had betrayed his trust. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. "Johnny, you're being unfair. I care about you. We're friends. I was just trying to address the elephant in the room." "Friends?" Johnny's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more power than his shouting had. Jimmy, friends don't ambush each other on national television. Friends don't use each other's pain for entertainment. Friends don't smile while they twist the knife. The weight of those words hit Jimmy like a physical blow. He actually took a step backward, nearly stumbling over his own chair. The man who had spent decades making others laugh now looked like he was about to cry. You want to know what friends do, Jimmy? Johnny continued, his voice building again. Friends show up when things get hard. Friends offer support, not judgment. Friends protect each other. They don't exploit each other for ratings. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked around the studio desperately, as if searching for someone to save him from the hole he had dug for himself. But there was no one. Even his own crew was staring at him with a mixture of shock and disappointment. You know what the saddest part of all this is? Johnny said, shaking his head slowly. I actually looked up to you once. I thought you were one of the good ones. I thought you understood that there's a difference between entertainment and exploitation. But I was wrong. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This had transcended typical television drama. This was a masterclass in human dignity, watching someone stand up for themselves against a powerful figure who had clearly crossed the line. Jimmy finally found his voice, but it came out as barely more than a croak. Johnny, please don't do this. Think about what this means. What this means. Johnny stepped even closer to Jimmy's desk, his presence filling the entire studio. What this means, Jimmy, is that some things are more important than television. Some things are more important than rating. Some things are more important than your show. With that, Johnny began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. The small act somehow carried enormous weight, like watching someone remove a crown or lay down a sword. Johnny, wait, Jimmy called out, panic clear in his voice. We can fix this. We can edit it. We can start over. Johnny paused in his movement toward the exit and turned back one final time. Jimmy, you can't edit character. You can't start over from integrity. What happened here tonight? What you chose to do? That's who you really are. And everyone saw it. He finished removing his microphone and set it gently on Jimmy's desk, the small gestures somehow more devastating than if he had thrown it down in anger. Ladies and gentlemen, Johnny said, addressing the audience directly for the first time. I'm sorry you had to witness this. You came here for entertainment, and instead you got a masterclass in how not to treat another human being. And with that, Johnny Depp walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a stunned audience, a crew in shock, and a host who had just learned the hardest lesson of his career. The cameras kept rolling as Jimmy stood alone at his desk, finally understanding that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt.